timeless voices of the eternal church.
The Moravian Indian Massacre, Ohio, March 8, 1782. The Moravian Church traces its history back to John Hus. Like other Protestants, Hus's followers were severely persecuted and scattered, but a hidden seed continued in Moravia. In the early 1700s, Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf of Saxony, present-day Germany, allowed these oppressed Moravian brethren to take refuge on his estate. Soon, a Christian community called Herrnhut, meaning under the Lord's watch, was thriving in Zinzendorf's land. The vision of Herrnhut was not simply to establish Christian communities, but to train believers to spread the gospel, especially to oppressed peoples. The first two missionaries were sent to the black slaves of the West Indies in 1732. When Zinzendorf died in 1760, 226 missionaries had been sent all over the world. No other church has equaled the Moravian Brethren in commitment to missions. They have often succeeded where others failed because they represented only the gospel and not the interest of any government. They refused to use violence, even in their own defense, and remained neutral in wartime, often at risk to their own lives. David Zeisberger, who grew up in Herrnhut, became a missionary to the Indian tribes in Pennsylvania, first living among the Mohawks and learning their language, and later preaching to the receptive and peace-loving Delaware tribes. Thousands were converted to Christ and formed villages of Christian Indians. The Moravian Indians were both admired and hated. Admired because of their industriousness and prosperity. Hated because they refused to be drawn into the hostilities between Indians and whites. Time and time again, the little bands of Moravian Indians were driven from one place to another. In 1776, the Americans declared their independence from Britain. The British tried to stir up the Indian tribes against the American settlers. When Zeisberger used his influence to keep the Delaware Nation from being dragged into the war, the British were furious. In early October 1781, the missionaries were taken prisoner and moved to Detroit, and the rest of the Christian Indians were forced to abandon their thriving villages along the Muskingum River in Ohio before they could harvest their crops. They got as far as Sandusky River and set up a temporary village they called Captivestown. The winter of 1781 to 1782 in Captivestown was brutal. Discouraged by the absence of their Moravian pastors and on the verge of starvation, a large party of men, women, and children decided to return to their former villages and harvest the corn that still lay in their fields. Arriving in early March, they set to work, filling baskets with the ears still hanging on the stalks. They worked joyfully, hope rising in their hearts. Unknown to them, an Indian war party had recently massacred a white settler and his family. An angry mob of white militiamen heard that the Moravian Indians had returned and thought the murderers might be hiding among them. At first, pretending to be friendly, the militia lured the harvesters together in the main meeting house at one of the 3 abandoned villages. Once gathered, the militiamen locked the door and clubbed them to death. On March 8, 1782, 90 unarmed men, women, and children were massacred at Ganadin Hutton, meaning tents of grace, and the village burned to the ground. Several years later, a party of Moravian Indians returned to the site of the massacre. Setting fire to the grounds which had overgrown the once thriving village of Ganadin Hutton, they found the bones of their murdered brethren and gave them a Christian burial. Voice of the Hero. Where shall we find a retreat, if only a little spot of earth whither we may flee with our Indians? The world is not wide enough From the whites who call themselves Christians, we can hope for no protection. Among the heathens, we no longer have any friends. We are outlaws. But the Lord reigneth. He will not forsake us. David Zeisberger, on hearing the tragic news of the massacre. God has said, I will never fail you. I will never forsake you. That is why we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Hebrews 13, verses 5 to 6.
Reading from the complete book of Christian heroes, over 200 stories of courageous people who suffered for Jesus, compiled by Dave and Nita Jackson. This is the Eternal Church of Jesus Christ, the record.